We began last time the text of the chapter titled The Cosmic Consciousness, where Sri Aurobindo, having described the unification of the passive Brahman and the active Brahman, now leads us into an exploration of this complete experience. As a first step, we saw last time the exchange of our individual consciousness with the active Brahman. This is switching the individual for the cosmic consciousness. And then he took a while to point out what is the nature of this individual ego-based consciousness, how we are able to disengage from this ego identification and become one with the true individual within us. And from that true individual we can get back to something still more essential, the pure self. And from the pure self you are aware of the active Brahman, the silence of the passive Brahman, and in between, in the full play, in between, spanning these two extremes, is what he has described as the cosmic consciousness. And there are two approaches to this. One is as if breaking the walls of the ego laterally, identifying oneself with all existences wider and wider. The other is shooting straight to pure self, and from there re-embracing the cosmic movement. Now this is in sum the paragraph we had covered last time. There are a few interesting observations, elaborations and examples that will be worthwhile to explore further to complete this discussion. He mentions in that passage which we read last time that the primary identification we make in the ego is with the mind. And in order to detach from the ego, we get back from mind, we get back from the vital as well as the physical body, mind, life and body. But the primary identification was the poise of the mind. So if you recall the text, he says, the individual soul identifying himself with the nodus of his mental, vital, physical experiences in the movement of universal nature, with his mind-created ego, and less intimately with mind, life, body, which receive the experiences. So the whole identification is on this triple mind, life, body nodus, where the three join. But the ego sense created in the mind is where we are primarily identified. And through that, partly, with the rest of our mental awareness, life awareness and body awareness, where you can actually stand back from your body, observe, my hands are shaking, and I will myself into stability. My emotions are disturbed, I will myself into calm. My thoughts are confused, I will myself into clarity. The I who is doing this is the mental center, mental ego point, with which my true soul has identified to a degree where it has forgotten itself. I am now this center of mind and nothing else. Now, this is a very important point to recognize. It gives you also the key to freedom. The key to freedom is also disengaging from this mental identification. The other three are relatively easier because they are not fully identified with. But this is the point which is the most difficult to free from. It is in the mind also that the identification is also most flexible. And I want to show you certain examples of this with recent experiments done in psychology. A lot of interesting studies observing the mind and the brain and the linkage between these are going on. There's one series of experiments, you can search them on the internet. They come under 2 or 3 different headings. Look for phantom limb experiment, or terms like false hand or fake hand experiment, or rubber hand experiment, things like that. You will find, I'll describe what happens in that experiment. So first of all, the person being tested, that's me, as the experimented, places his hand on the table, and then a sheet of paper is placed, so I do not see it anymore. My hand is hidden from my eyes. As a variation, my hand may be put under the table. And instead of where my hand would be on the table, they put a rubber hand. And on the other side is the experimenter. And he takes a little feather and tickles my, let's say, one of my fingers. And he touches the rubber finger in front of me, and at the same time, exactly synchronized, below the table or behind the sheet of paper, he touches my real hand. So what's happening is, on my real hand a contact is being made, and in front of me I'm only seeing the rubber hand on which the same contact at the same time is made. The interesting thing is, after a while I begin to identify with the rubber hand as my actual hand. I forget this hand, I do not feel it anymore. I begin to feel this as my own hand. I feel my arm going here. And suddenly, if he hits the rubber hand, I feel as if the sensation hitting me. Variations to this experiment, where, for example, one of the things they observe is what is actually happening inside the brain and the nervous system. So you're mapping the brain at the same time as this experiment is done. And you notice the signals coming through the hand, my physical hand, are enormously reduced. And yet in the brain there is registration of some sensation. So where is it coming from? It's not actually coming from my physical hand. The person stops touching my finger physically and he continues on the rubber hand. And I still feel the sensation. I still identify myself with the rubber hand. And in my brain there are no more signals coming through the hand proper, but something is registering the sensation and the identification here. What has happened? And the only explanation we have from the yogic perspective is a very simple explanation. Your actual mental awareness of the hand has shifted to the rubber. And I'm pointing to this to prove how easily the mind awareness can shift, how flexible and fluid it actually is. The identification with my physical hand, although since my childhood, for so many decades, has been fixed in this hand, within a few minutes, seconds even, the identification can be shifted to a rubber hand, where my mind actually feels the rubber hand as my own. Now at that point, if you give two sensations which are different, I experience in the lab as if I have three hands. I have one hand where I have sensations, the other one, this one which is the original biological hand, where I have a sensation, and then the rubber hand feels like my own hand, and I feel myself having three hands. Interesting. And it's confusing at first, but it shows you how flexible the mental awareness is. It can even be taught to have a body with three hands within a minute or two. So quickly. Okay, a variation to this now. You are asked to wear goggles with screens, or you have a projector which comes on the eyes, some variation to that, so that you see what they project. And then you are shown the picture of a doll's feet with a camera, and somebody now starts tickling your foot with the same movement happening on the doll's foot. And quickly your body or your mental awareness identifies with the doll's feet awareness, and you start feeling as if your feet have shrunk, they've become small. It's so quick, within a few minutes. The same variation, you are made to see not a picture of the doll's feet, someone else's viewpoint. So I'm sitting here, I have this picture of the world. Somebody else sitting outside, maybe watching a garden, and their view is now projected on my eyes. And after a while, as if I feel I am outside. Or another person in the same room with a different angle, and his view is projected on my eyes. And after a while, I feel as if I am seeing through their eyes. So they are able to create, with variations to this experiment, the experience of being outside your body, looking at yourself. Because you are shown your picture looking through their eyes, turning to you, and maybe with a contact with the feather or something is done, or simply looking at it long enough, after a while your mind is looking at you, and you don't feel you're in the body, you are in the other person's body. It's so quick. This is at the very core of a whole new realm of experience, which is now called virtual reality, where you wear goggles with three-dimensional images projected on you, and if to that you can add a few sensations of contact, you feel yourself in a different world. But that's still, you may say, fantasy, like watching a movie. Here is an actual physical experience that's taking place. But the mind is so fluid, so plastic in its identification. It can move out of your body, identify with a different angle, different perspective, different object, shrink your feet, exchange your awareness with somebody else's body, change your angles of world vision. Easy. And all this we are able to watch in the brain, actually in the biological nervous system. There's a shift. It's not just a fantasy created in the mind. In the actual response of the nerves, there's a change. And I'm pointing to this only to show you how fluid this mind-created ego is. And the only reason why I'm here in this body looking through these eyes, identified with this mind-created ego, is habit and no other stimuli pushing me to view things in a different way. You can try this experiment, step out and look at the sky, and of course you feel yourself on top of the earth. The whole earth is below you. Now you can visualize or consider the earth is like a big ball under your feet, and you're on top looking at the sky. And then in your mind you can switch positions. Well, we are now somewhere nearer to the equator, perhaps 12 degrees north of the equator in Pondicherry. And so consider now, this is your position on the earth as a globe. You are on the side, and what you're looking at up is actually the sky on the side. Think about it. Just visualize what that means. And at some point, suddenly your mind snaps and you feel, I am like this in space, sideways. Or flip it around, imagine somebody else on the other side of the earth. They are now on top, they are looking at the sky and above, and you are now below in relation to them. And after a few seconds, suddenly there's a click and you feel, I'm hanging from the ground, I'm hanging downwards. And momentarily with the shock, your mind will move back and forth between these two. And after a while, you'll find you can settle yourself in this new vision, new perspective. And it's easy. It's fun even. You suddenly realize your mind's sense of I and relation with the world is in fact so fluid and plastic. And this is the point he's making here. The individual soul identifying himself with the nodus of his mental, vital, physical experiences in the movement of universal nature, with his mind-created ego. That's where the identification is. And less intimately with the mind, life, body, which receive the experiences. By detaching himself from all identification with mind, life, and body, he can get back from his ego to the consciousness of the true individual. So this process of detaching also, having tried these experiments a little bit, you will find you are not so fixated on your biology and this body and mind center. You can actually flip yourself, move yourself around a little bit, but this is still in the physical space, in a physical focus. You can equally disengage from all physical focus, and that stepping back becomes not so difficult for the mind. Of course, then there are degrees. So this is one important observation to recognize, in fact, things are much more flexible, precisely because the mind is plastic. The knot of the ego, Sri Aurobindo mentions, is in the vital ego. That's where the fear instincts are rooted. Even the physical ego instinct is not so strong. It's the vital ego with the desire, attachments, and survival instincts that you get the most intense difficulty in practical life to get free of ego. But if with the mind you're able to detach, all the other things become much easier. Second observation to make is when he speaks of this larger awareness of the cosmic consciousness, he says we can arrive at that whether by breaking the walls of the ego laterally or by from above by realizing the pure self. These are the two approaches which we have discussed before. But this walls of the ego laterally, and I want to elaborate on this sense of lateral expansion. In fact, as we grow wider in our awareness, less identified with our narrow personality, we have the sense of widening, and we tend to describe it as a wideness around. Now you may say this is purely a question of human habit because the world is around us. We are used to seeing the world in a two-dimensional expanse around. We don't really see our life vertically upward or downward. But I would put the question differently. Why don't we see our life vertically upward and downward? Why do we tend to see everything more laterally? Even if you are in a multi-story building, you're aware that there are floors above and below. But your natural tendency of awareness is to the rooms around you and not to the rooms below and above, isn't it? If somehow you are walking in a space where, on a floor where there is a sheet of glass and you're able to see the rooms below or the space below, it is disconcerting. If you open to something above which is wide and free, you look up, you feel good, you feel free. But you're still not living with awareness of things above, you're living with awareness around. It's not just a question of convention, there is a deeper principle behind that. You will notice that in our experience of different qualities or grades of consciousness, we tend naturally to use a vocabulary of higher and lower. I was in a heightened state of awareness. And or if you say, I was in a more fine, more free, more subtle awareness, you tend to place it above. Awareness which is gross, dull, heavy, bound in inertia and narrowness, we tend to place it below. Even in our physical body, we tend to associate dullness and heaviness with the abdomen, whereas lightness and freedom with the head or even above head. And there's a reason for this. In fact, all grades of consciousness are everywhere at the same time, isn't it? Because if you lie down flat on your back, it's not like your head somehow comes down from a higher state of consciousness. Or if you hang upside down, your head would not be in a lower state of consciousness. It's not a physical location. But somehow the states of awareness are associated in a vertical map in us, because in the subtle body, the focal points of each state of consciousness are placed in a vertical ascending line. The chakras, as we know them. The chakras dealing with lower grades of consciousness, centers of those consciousness are below, centers of higher grades of consciousness are above, and because the centers are aligned vertically, and the center is the point from which you experience the grade of consciousness, being aligned vertically in sequence, we have the sense of higher consciousness being above and lower consciousness being below. So, for example, when you concentrate and you have the sense of a rising awareness or a rising movement of consciousness, you have the sense of something as if going upwards. And sometimes even it can as if keep going upwards, higher and higher and higher. Now, it's not the physical distance. It's not 5 centimeters up, 50 centimeters, 5 meters up. It's more the sense of a step higher in grade of awareness, but it so happens to be felt as vertical upwards. Similarly, an inward movement is not a physical location, but because the center of the inner being is behind the emotional center, we feel a sense of going in as we go back. Only because the centers registering this grade of consciousness are so located. The result is, practically in our life, at whatever poise we are at in grade of consciousness, our experience of the levels above is of a different grade, levels below is a different grade, and therefore all around is same grade. And instinctively, therefore, we tend to live life from that certain grade around us. Now, if in the midst of this interaction my consciousness shifts into a higher grade, I may even experience, while I am interacting here, I may experience myself poised above and as if simultaneously looking down while I am here and engaged. I think these are experiences most of us have had, off and on, spontaneously also, or even consciously. If you are in some interaction and momentarily you concentrate and align yourself with the mother, open to a higher inspiration, automatically something is felt as if rising or stationed higher up than your primary focus, which is around here. Equally, when you experience some anger or disturbance, emotional disturbance, we describe it as rising up from below, rising up until it hits your current domain of awareness and clouds everything. So, the sense of lateral expansion is precisely this: your awareness widens out. There is also a sense of heightening, but much less. Because the primary sense of widening is into the wideness of the cosmos in the grade in which you are. Or there is a kind of a breaking out, which is what happens when you step back from the identification with the personality. It's as if you lean back into rest, into a silence which is behind everything. Now, what is behind everything? It's not behind at my back, it's behind the whole universe. But the sense of behind comes because the part in us where this is felt most easily is as if behind and slightly above. Often right at the top of the head or slightly behind. These are again because the centers are rooted there. Sri Aurobindo describes the center of the psychic being, the psychic presence, as deep within the center of the chest, behind the emotions. But the center of the individual self as above the head. And so often one has the sense of something here or a little behind. So the sense of ego laterally being widened or dissolved or thinned is coming because of this deeper truth of the way our subtle body and the centers of consciousness are organized. Once we are sufficiently based in that freer, wider, higher consciousness, and we are no more looking out from within the narrower ego consciousness, this makes no difference. Everything is everywhere. You experience it like that, vividly, intensely. There is no sense of up and down. You may use the vocabulary more because of the experience within the body form, but the moment you're free even of the subtle body awareness, everything is everywhere at the same time. So he will be describing that shortly in the very next paragraph as we go along. He also describes the second method, which is to shoot straight in concentration into the pure self and then know everything as its outgoing, immanent, all-embracing, all-constituting self-knowledge and self-creative power. We discussed this last time, but each of these words represents an aspect of the experience of the self as it accepts the universe and the cosmic consciousness. And each of these aspects can be dwelt upon, experienced separately, but as a practitioner of the integral yoga, we don't stop at the aspect we have, but we consciously include all of them. And so this process also he will be describing in the next two paragraphs, which we now continue. It is as the immanent, silent self in all that the foundation of this cosmic consciousness can most easily be laid by the mental being. The witness, pure and omnipresent, who regards all activity of the universe as the conscious soul of the cosmos. So this starting point is telling you the most easy way for the mental being. All of these qualifiers are important. There are many ways you could get to this cosmic consciousness. Perhaps many foundations, even if you really looked at it as a possibility. But it is in this immanent silent self, which is in all things, this experience that you have the foundation of the cosmic consciousness most easily for the mental being. Now, there are people who have had experiences or glimpses of some universality in other levels, not so much in the mental consciousness. We discussed last time briefly of the nature of experiences that can be had under certain kinds of psychotropic drugs, where in your given consciousness you open out to an experience of some kind of universality. And very often it is felt in the vital or the physical consciousness, often perceived through the senses. Then obviously the senses get overwhelmed, they blur things, the forms and realities tend to blend into each other. Or in vital consciousness, where one is overwhelmed with the continuum of emotional identification with other beings, and so on. These are very different in character from what is described here for the mental being, where the poise of the mind is much more of the pure witness. And so what he describes subsequently is of the poise of the mental being, which is the most secure, most stable, as also the most conscious foundation that we can have. The other experiences are more disruptive. They may help to break at best your narrow ego identification, but they leave you with a huge confusion and they destabilize your personality. Whereas the mind standing back in a pure witness gives you the foundation for stability in your personality. So, the two words he has used, immanent and silent self in all. This is the foundation for the cosmic consciousness. Now, you have not had cosmic consciousness with this alone. This is only foundation. So, what does it mean as a foundation? You can start in many ways. The whole of the last chapter was developing this idea. But otherwise, you can start in many ways, even with your current awareness. You will recall Sri Aurobindo describing in his Tales of Prison Life, when he was in jail, the form of his meditative practice, where he would be walking in the garden, looking around at the trees, at the sky, remembering the sacred verses of the Upanishad, and particularly, all this verily is Brahman, or all this is for the habitation of the Lord. And with the mind's awareness imprinting this idea in everything that he was seeing. It's a very simple practice, and you do it with eyes open. You can do it in principle anywhere, even in the midst of a very busy marketplace. Of course, it's easier at first to do it when the space is quieter, more beautiful perhaps, nature, garden, sky, ocean. But once you get the hang of it, you can remain in it in the midst of any, even chaotic environments. And the idea is simply this: all this is filled with the presence of the divine in all things, in all objects, even in the space in between objects, everywhere. And the concept which has been discussed in the earlier chapters is of some kind of an underlying ether that fills everything, as if a liquid that's filling and passing through equally all things. But not stopping with that, the thing which fills itself eventually exceeds space and time. That's what gives to it the completeness and to the silent self. So immanent and silent at the same time. These are the two facets. That thing is not moving. There is a movement taking place, but that thing is completely still, rock solid, unchanging. And you focus your attention on that sense of that which is unchanging in all things, immanent. So it is as the immanent silent self in all that the foundation of this cosmic consciousness can most easily be laid by the mental being. And so because it is also the perception of the mental being, through this, as you gaze upon the world, the witness, capital W. Now it's not being which is witness, it is the silent self. But because we've entered through the mental being, it is at first felt as if your own mind's awareness is a witness, except you realize very quickly that it is this which is the true witness in all things. It's the second paragraph of the chapter. The text is different.
We start the immanent, silent self in all is the foundation of this cosmic consciousness for the experience of the mental being.
Okay, so this is possible. So I do not know why the text has been edited. It could be, as has happened, we find, for example, in Sri Aurobindo's own copy of some of these works in his room, that he has made some corrections. So,
This is like the old one.
uh-huh, yes. So in the new edition, there is some change in the text. It could be that Sri Aurobindo sometimes made corrections in his book, in his copy, and these have been incorporated in the new editions. So, but it does not change fundamentally the message itself. It's only a wording shift. So the witness is who? At first, because it's you, your mind. So your mind itself as if detaches, even from its own mental activity. And there's a sense of something which is vast, silent, simply aware. At some point, that itself merges into this awareness, which is the vast witness. So the witness, pure and omnipresent. So do you see the shift which has taken place? When you were looking, it was immanent and silent self in all things. The immanence has now become omnipresent. The one who is aware, who is watching as witness, is now watching everywhere. It's not I observing it which is everywhere. As the I merges, the experience becomes it is omnipresent. Similarly, I was observing this silent self in all things, and as the I merges into that, it becomes the pure witness. Meaning the awareness as witness is pure, nothing changing, nothing moving. It is simply. So the witness, pure and omnipresent, who regards all the activity of the universe, simply observing, as the conscious soul of the cosmos. And this is the interesting part. What is its relationship with the cosmos? As soul. What do we mean by soul? Essence. That which is essential to something is its soul. The soul of the flower. What does it mean? That which is the most essential reality of it. That's why we use the term for ourselves. What is our soul is our most essential reality, our most essential experience, existence. And what would such an essential existence be of the cosmos? So the soul of the cosmos is not a center physically located, not a point from which it looks out. It is the essence of the cosmos, of course, everywhere. And it is this witness, pure and omnipresent, who regards all activity of the universe as the conscious soul of the cosmos. And this first is the foundation. Now you notice how there has been a very smooth transition from our mind becoming aware of this which is everywhere, and our mind then lapsing into this, merging into its awareness. Between these two, there can be many degrees. There can even be partially a double awareness. I'm aware of this as more real than my mind's awareness which is watching it. And there's a point where you can choose, be more in that or be more in this. It doesn't negate the other. I can be more in that. Maybe at first I'll find it difficult to function normally as an individual. But then when I need to, I become aware of this center of the mind, which is aware of it, and functions. But that is more real than this. And whenever I choose, I can simply lapse back into that and be. At some point later, the two merge. There is no more any separation. You can have a focal point of action while still being just that. Now he gives you a different aspect to it. The experience so far has been this pure silent self. Now he says, Satchidananda, for whose delight universal nature displays the eternal procession of her works. So this is the conscious soul of the cosmos, for whose delight this universal nature displays. And you have the sense of this one vast awareness and there's drama, this play taking place all over. The image of the screen and the projection of light on the screen is so natural, except that the screen is three-dimensional. The projection on it, playing out all these forms and world and movements, is like a projection, a play of nature, universal nature. But now the element he has introduced is the element of delight. That consciousness is not only aware, not only existent and not only aware, it is also one of delight. And its relationship with nature is that nature displays this procession of her works for his delight. And so not only it lives in delight, its relationship with nature is also of delight. She is creating all this for the delight of this witness. And the wording he uses, very suggestive. Nature displays the eternal procession of her works. Now it is a display. It does not have the sense of a reality compared to that. That is more real. The witness, the foundation, this soul of the cosmos is the solidity. And on the surface is this play. It's like a display. And the display is a movement, a procession. Something is moving and one after another things come and go, come and go. The things are never really gone, they just fade away somewhere else. So when you watch a procession, you see something approaching you, and then it is in front of you, and then it moves away from you, out of your sight, but it's never really gone. So everything that nature is playing out, unfolding in the eternity of time, is always there. Even the most distant past is still there, but it's gone somewhere far away into the distance of the past. And there is only the present where the primary focus is. And so the idea of this picture of a procession moving gives you the sense of time, but also because this consciousness is outside time, it can enjoy time, but itself not being bounded to time, it sees the full continuum into eternity, into the past, into the future, and so the sense of the procession. Satchidananda, for whose delight universal nature displays the eternal procession of her works. She is working, she is doing, she is building, she is creating. You are not doing anything, only enjoying the delight. Now this is the first step. He will show you bit by bit how the experience now grows to become more complete until it embraces fully the active side of Brahman as itself. But this is your first base. We are aware of an unwounded delight, capital D. A pure and perfect presence, capital P. An infinite and self-contained power, capital P. Present in ourselves and all things. Not divided by their divisions, not affected by the stress and struggle of the cosmic manifestation. Within it all, even while superior to it all. There are many aspects to this one single experience. First, the awareness, he says, is of an unwounded delight. Remember, he has introduced this relationship of the delight. It is the reality of the cosmic soul. It is also the relationship of the play with the soul enjoying it. But the delight is unwounded. Unlike the experience within the ego consciousness, where the moment you reduce yourself to my little frame, mental, vital, physical, doesn't matter what. Doesn't matter how big. My little frame could be as big as my country, as big as my earth. But still, in the totality of the cosmos, it is finite. And a finite piece meeting the infinite will always experience an impact, eventually too intense to bear. wounded, therefore. You cannot have the experience of pure delight unwounded because you're finite. So the finiteness, how big, how small, is irrelevant. As long as it is finite, you have the wound. If you're big, you have a bigger wound. So I have conquered an entire country. I'm trying to conquer the world and I fail. My enlarged ego now experiences the failure more gigantically. I tried to conquer my little patch of land in my garden, and the ants invaded and I failed. Okay, I was hurt, but no big deal. But the point being, you cannot experience what is delight as long as there is this finiteness. And so in this awareness, we are aware of an unwounded delight. In this, all the human experiences of struggle and suffering just lapse like waves settling down, and suddenly they fizzle out into something which is like the underlying delight, which was always there, and now you become aware of it. And so in the transition from the narrow surface consciousness looking out to this to becoming one with it, there is a double awareness. There is still my I, which may still have a memory of what it's like to be hurt, and then there is something else behind, which is a delight, which is unwounded, and the two are like a double awareness. Except that the hurt now seems to be very superficial. Similar to an ant biting, I don't need to go into a rage when an ant bites. I don't need to get greatly disturbed. I say, oh, poor ant. I blow it off so as not to hurt it. It's a small sting. It's bearable. Or it's novel. That's what it feels like, the ant bite. Interesting. And so you have this double awareness, something behind which begins even to appreciate in its delight the varieties and colors of the smaller experiences and their appearance of hurt, pleasure, or pain. We are aware of an unwounded delight, and so this aspect is first presented by Sri Aurobindo. Second aspect he brings is pure and perfect presence, and third is infinite and self-contained power. Now the sequencing of these three is always important in Sri Aurobindo's writing. He never puts a sequence without some deeper sense. Often the sequence represents the most natural progression of the experience as it widens to become more complete. Could have come forward first. And you would say, with this I am experiencing cosmic consciousness. And you could stop there because it is so large, so complete, and say this is it. And it would be an error. Because you have not yet reached the fullness of the cosmic consciousness. You have not yet embraced the full play of the active Brahman in one being which is both passive and active. That is nowhere near this experience. We are still in the passive, looking out and growing in awareness and relationship of the active Brahman. But there are three facets to that experience. The delight, because you are silent, passive. So the play of the delight is the most obvious first experience. And in that, the second can grow, a pure and perfect presence. So at first it was only the silence watching because it does nothing. Already the presence means something positive impacting. And the presence grows, and when it becomes more dense, more intense, we experience it as a power. So across the three also there is a continuity, although they represent different facets. A pure and perfect presence. And when this presence and the awareness of the presence grows, it's very easy for the heart to turn and you feel, this is the divine, this is God. And the heart turns in self-giving, and because already the basis of the delight is there, it can be a self-giving in love and bhakti. And so the whole world is seen as body of God, or play taking place for God or on the body of God, whatever the relationship. But the sense of the consciousness, which is the witness, has become now a presence, almost like a being, conscious of itself, even as it is conscious of the play which is being displayed by nature. And for this he uses two descriptions, pure and perfect. And the sense of this one feels, in the pure, there is nothing which is not that. All is that. And the perfection is because in the human sensory experience, there's nothing more beautiful, nothing more complete, nothing more in perfect harmony. And so comes the sense of perfect. But presence, no form. And that can fill everything, that can support everything, that can become everything even. But in itself it is formless presence. And into that, as the presence becomes more dense, more intense, comes the aspect of power. And what is the power felt like? It feels as if it fills everything. A power so humongous that it fills the entire cosmos. What would it feel like? Infinite power. And where is it held? Where is it rushing? Where is it pouring? No, it's not moving. It is contained, held in that. Simply. So, an infinite and self-contained power. And where is it? Because it is everywhere, present in ourselves and in all things. So when you say in ourselves, it's not like I am filled with this power and now I will go out and do something. It's just equally in me and in all things. There is no I exaggeration of the ego. It is the power which is in all things, but equally within me as in all things. And it being in all things equally, because it's also on the basis of the conscious soul of the cosmos, it is not affected by the sense of divisions that we are used to seeing. So, not divided by their divisions, not affected by the stress and struggle of manifestation, within it all, even while superior to it all. And again, here this represents two stages in the experience. At first, the whole focus is that it is in everything. The struggles are happening, but that is unaffected by the struggles, unaffected by the divisions. You see, a mountain shatters, but that is still equally the same. A planet breaks, that is still equally the same. There is a supernova, that is still equally the same in all things. It is not affected by that, nor the stress and struggle. But the second aspect of the experience is, while it is in all things, it is free of them, and the sense of its freedom and transcendence of all things, that grows, and so superior to it all. And now comes, because of this shift, a new relationship. So he's describing in sequence how the relationship is deepening and growing. And in the description, he leads you into the experience. So when you experience this superior to it all, you play, or your awareness now explores this part which is superior and this part which is in all things. Because of that, all this exists. But that does not exist because of all this. And the relationship is set. That is the foundation. It is too great to be limited by the movement in time and space which it inhabits and supports. You see, already in the experience, the focus is much more on the aspect of going beyond time and space while being still inside time and space. So the consciousness is now perceived, and if you dwell upon it as you read this, one intuitively senses. It's no more in the surface reasoning mind or surface senses. It is a more intuitive inner awareness where you sense something which exceeds time and space and yet enters, fills, supports, inhabits all this movement in time and space. And now, remaining in such a consciousness, what do you experience? You share in its transcendence of space and time. You share in its immanence within space and time. The aspect which is transcending space and time gives you the sense of the word he uses next, security. So he says, this foundation enables us to possess, in the security of the divine existence, the whole universe within our own being. But this word security, feeling secure, not feeling vulnerable, not feeling capable of being overwhelmed. Now, if you look at this feeling of what is meant by security, you will notice in human beings the urge for security is very deep. We do not realize it because we generally translate that need in terms of its forms. I want to have more money. I want to own my own house. I want to possess all my basic requirements, not have it on rent, not having a mortgage to a bank, because that means any day I could lose it. The security is that it is stable, it can never be broken, it can never be lost. It is for eternity. That's the sense of security. You have all that you need for your survival and existence forever. Is there anything which is forever after all? Nothing. Your machines which make your life comfortable can break down. Your house can be invaded by termites or by fire or a storm which can blow it away. Nothing is secure ultimately. And yet we're craving for and trying to establish ourselves in the universe to make ourselves more secure. And so this sense of security is what Mother refers to as when she speaks of how each avatar has looked at or sought to know the divine from one of its aspects. I think it was of the Buddhist experience that she spoke of as the seeking for permanence. To be free of suffering is to be in a permanence that is secure. It can never be wounded. You see? And then she says, for Sri Aurobindo, it was the aspect of perfection. And that includes all these facets. So the sense of security is only found in a consciousness which is not in change. Being in time and space, it has to be founded or based in something outside time and space. Only such a consciousness can give you the security inside time and space. True security, you may say, is to get out of time and space. That's what happens in the seeking for the absolute, as in the approach of Buddhism or the later Vedanta, where you get out of it and then you're secure in that. But our goal is to experience the security in time and space, and so only a consciousness which has both. And that's what we have just seen. It is too great to be limited by the movement in time and space, which it inhabits and supports. And so, this foundation enables us to possess, in the security of the divine existence, the whole universe within our own being. And so not only the security, but in the security is the completeness of everything in us. Notice these two are connected. First, our instinct is to try to make our lives more secure. So all the basic necessities which would make our life stable. Once we have the security, the desire has not gone. I am still incomplete because the whole universe out there which is not mine, which is not me. And so bit by bit I start craving a little more and a little more. Always the urge of our desire is towards that which is most lacking in us, or towards that which will give us, we hope, that which is lacking in us. For some, it may be clothing, fashionable, but what are you looking for through fashionable clothing? Depending on people, it may be respect in others' eyes, the sense of lordship and authority from others, or it can be acceptance or love from others, or it may be simply, for someone else, the sense of radiating the beauty that I feel within me through the form of my clothing and actions. The actual cause may be many. The form of it in which I try to fulfill this need is not it. It is only incidental. If you observe carefully, all of our human desires, they point to something. And through a process of introspection, if we can recognize what the thing is, then we can often complete it by a shift in our consciousness, and the need for that external device fades out. But it is completely gone when we have it all. The whole universe is ours, because in our consciousness, now complete, we can hold it and still not be bound by it. The whole universe within our being, we possess with this security. This foundation enables us, we are no longer limited and shut in by what we inhabit, but like the divine, contain in ourselves all that for the purpose of the movement of nature, we consent to inhabit. So here's the shift in the relationship. In the normal consciousness, we have the sense of entering the body, inside the body-mind complex, looking at the universe, but trapped inside this body. This is the experience the soul has at the time that it enters the half-formed body of the child. Now, the experience can be had while the child is still in the womb, partially. For a more developed soul, often the full completion is when after the child is born that the soul fully enters. And then at that point, you have the sense of being bound. Or, as has happened in some rare cases, and it's possible always for it to happen, where a formed human being and personality consents to accept a higher being, sometimes as a vibhuti, or sometimes simply as a power that aligns or inhabits this personality and body. So even there the experience is, here's a formed individual body, and you as a consciousness enter, and then you're stuck and bound. Of course, for the higher beings, this is extreme and claustrophobic, and so they may participate momentarily and then withdraw, which is what we see, for example, in the life of Joan of Arc, where she had this afflatus of a divine power filling her whole being, and she was this extraordinary divine being in a human body, and then it would withdraw, and she would find herself pretty much in a semi-normal condition with the glow of that remaining, which is often the case in some of these experiences, even in the yoga, where a certain power descends in us to fill, and then it either withdraws or we are unable to contain and we spill it. But when it is a conscious being that comes, it is felt almost like a suffocating constraint. So this is our relationship with our ego-based mind-life body. But now this is completely reversed. We experience ourselves in this foundation, which is outside time and inside time, and thus able to embrace everything, the whole universe including, contain and inhabit without being bound. So the phrasing he uses, we are no longer limited and shut in by what we inhabit, but like the divine, contain in ourselves all that for the purpose of the movement of nature we consent to inhabit. So remember right at the beginning when he described the form of the ego experience is when the true person, the Jivatman, individual soul, identifies himself with the nodus of mind, life, body and gets lost in it. Now you have disengaged and you have embraced from outside while still inhabiting. And therefore you can inhabit without being bound because you're equally around. The experience, if we had to make an analogy, would be similar to putting your hand in gloves. You notice even as you put your hand in the gloves, if the gloves are a little tight, your other hand pulls the gloves. You're in it and yet you're outside it and can play with the form. You can adjust it from outside while still being adjusting from inside. And so you're not bound. If you entirely enter into it, you're stuck with its limitations, unable then to be yourself. And here the importance of the consent to inhabit, always it's a choice. When people speak of in certain systems that we are trapped, our souls are trapped in this cycle of birth and death, we're trapped in the cycle of karma. Yes, in a certain sense, if you look at it that way. But if you look at it from the larger picture, not only you chose enthusiastically. Oh, what an adventure. And for the purpose of the adventure, you accepted to identify to the point of self-loss, forgetting. And a part of you, that is the foundation of your self, is still there at the back, supporting, still drawing the nourishment of this limited experience of the surface. So this becomes the prominent truth of our being. We consent to inhabit for the purpose of the participation in the movement. We are not mind or life or body, but the informing and sustaining soul, silent, peaceful, eternal, that possesses them. So we are informing, forming from within, sustaining, that is to support and nourish from inside, but also at the same time possessing them. They don't possess us, we possess mind, life and body. So the nature of the soul as it informs, nourishes, sustains and possesses is silent, peaceful, eternal. So in the midst of all the movement and all the life experience, this is silent. This is always at peace. This is always permanent. Now these are three things which you will find reflecting in your consciousness as you grow in closeness to the presence of the self or the inmost soul. Silence, because that is not agitation. Peaceful, it is not disturbed by the appearances. And eternal, you do not have the fear of death or the sense of having been born and therefore dying. But there's always the sense of a continuity. And with it the sense of security. Nothing ever can stop me. Things can knock out my body, just as they could knock out my house. My clothes could be torn, my body could be torn, but I can never be affected. So you will recall in the Bhagavad Gita, there's a very powerful passage where Sri Krishna describes the nature of the soul and its immunity. Immunity is the word I was looking for, which is like the complementary aspect of the security. You're immune from everything that happens. Whatever may happen, it cannot affect you fundamentally. So there Sri Krishna describes the immunity of the soul, that the weapons cannot cut it, the waters cannot wet it, the wind cannot blow it, or the fire cannot burn it. Now, you'll wonder why these things. You will notice they all represent the 5 elements. The descriptions he gives of the things which cannot harm the soul, they represent the 5 elements in sequence, suggesting that when you cover all five elements, you're covering all things of the cosmos and all phenomena on all levels of reality, not just the physical. So in a single statement, he has shown the immunity of the soul from any changing process in the entire cosmos across all levels of consciousness. So, we are not mind or life or body, but the informing and sustaining soul, capital S, silent, peaceful, eternal, that possesses them. And this soul we find everywhere, sustaining and informing and possessing all lives and minds and bodies, and cease to regard it as a separate and individual being in our own. So again, it's the next step from here. You're aware of this in yourself, but now equally you're aware of this in all things. It is doing exactly the same thing in the same soul even. Capital S, soul of the whole cosmos, which is also your soul now. Everywhere sustaining, informing and possessing. So it is as if the foundation which supports all this movement of nature, it pours into all things which the movement forms, filling them like air inside the balloon, which keeps the shape of the balloon. You take out the air and the whole balloon collapses. So not only the air is sustaining the balloon as it is, it fills the balloon to give it its form and function, and at the same time it is outside and possessing the balloon from outside in all ways. What is the reality of the balloon? Only this very thin layer of the play of nature, and everything in the world is felt like this, supported, sustained, informed, as well as possessed by this, all lives and minds and bodies. And it's no more in me separate, in the other separate, it is one soul. We cease to regard it as a separate and individual being in our own. In it, all this moves and acts. Within all this, it is stable and immutable. So now is this, remember, bit by bit, you see, he has shifted our awareness to what it's like to live from there into this. We started the whole exercise by perceiving it from our consciousness. And we ended by living in it and looking through it at our and other consciousnesses. In it, all this moves and acts. Within all this, it is stable and immutable. So now he is giving you both sides as complementary. It is the underlying spiritual ether, we may say, or self, in which all this moves and acts, and it is that which is stable and unchanging in all this. Now, if you look at it purely from a physical form, that is the medium in which this is happening, and then inside this, that is the stable. It almost looks like two different poises, extremes. But if you enter into the perception of it with a more intuitive awareness of mind, you realize it's the same thing. It is as if the thing in which all this play is taking place, as it is the thing in which everything is taking place, it supports all things without changing. It's one thing. It's not. So this is how it works. As we approach from our surface mind and physical senses to things of the higher reality, they take on more and more paradoxical forms. It's like this and like that, which to the human experience is opposite. But when you enter the consciousness, oh, these are just two aspects of the same one. In it, all this moves and acts. Within all this, it is stable and immutable. Having this, we possess our eternal self-existence at rest in its eternal consciousness and bliss. So these are the three aspects: existence, consciousness, bliss. That's the nature of the Satchidananda. Having this, we possess These three at rest. Existence at rest in consciousness and bliss. Now, at this point, you see the whole focus is on the silence and the immutability. And this is still the poise of the silent Brahman, the passive Brahman. And the play of nature is taking place on it, dependent on it. We have not yet embraced the active Brahman. And from here we will move now to that poise. And the next chapter, the next paragraph, describes the steps by which from this poise we proceed to embrace. And again you will find there a series of stages, fine steps, each one mapped out in detail. Next, we have to realize this silent self as the Lord of all the action of universal nature. The same self-existent displayed in the creative force of its eternal consciousness. So far the play of universal nature was there displaying her procession of her works on the surface of this. And this was filling it and so on. But it was her work. Where did she come from? Who is she? And that's the relationship. This silent self is Lord of all the action of the universal nature. That power of nature which is working is the creative force of its eternal consciousness. It is its consciousness, its power of creation, its awareness, its energy which is moving to do all this. And so you dwell on that idea. Living in this, in the silence, you observe all these movements and begin to see them. That it is the awareness and energy of this silence which moves. All this action is power and knowledge and self-delight, going abroad in His infinite being to do the works of His eternal wisdom and will. So here in the formulation, both he captures the nature of the experience but also the understanding of it. What is it that moved to create this play? Power, knowledge, and delight. What can move things? What can move his own awareness? Of course, himself, his own power and knowledge. But self-delight. Now the idea is somewhere inside him, remember there was the sense of the power, there was the sense of the presence and the delight. That delight to be myself moves to be delight to become in all the things that I am already. That power which was in silence, held back, you remember self-contained power, that ceases to contain itself, moves to express itself. That pure presence now is the wisdom of which sees and forms all this. So all this action is only his power and knowledge and self-delight going abroad. It's as if going out of himself. But what is the out? Because everything is only himself. The out is only a shift from this poise of silence. It moves out of the silence into activity, into movement. But where? In itself, because everything is filled by it and sustained by it. So going out into himself. Going abroad in his infinite being to do the works of his eternal wisdom and will. So here come these two new terms, wisdom and will. There was awareness, there was knowledge of awareness, but wisdom is the form the knowledge takes in the movement. And will is that which pushes out from his silence to drive the movement. It's the power. What was earlier as contained power, as active power movement, what guides it, what leads it is the will. We realize the divine, the eternal self of all, first as the source of all action and inaction. At the same time, it is the source of action and inaction. Now here, this is one of those things which, from the surface mind, you look, that's an interesting paradox. But when you look from inside the consciousness, it's obvious. What is inaction? It's just a different aspect of action. Because after all, it is outside space and time. To hold inaction in space and time is equally the nature of the choice of the will, as it is the choice of the will to be in action. They're just the same thing, taking two different forms. So, first, we realize the divine, the eternal self of all, as the source of all action and inaction, of all knowledge and ignorance. Again, interesting. From the other side, it looks like, paradox. How can the divine be source of ignorance? But from this side, when you look, what moves, when it reveals itself, it is knowledge. When it uses one revealing aspect to cover another revealing aspect, it is ignorance. What is ignorance? Something concealing, something not seen, but which is there. And the knowledge itself, as it moves, once it moves into form, there can be layers, facets, aspects which cover, conceal. That's your ignorance. That same thing coming forward becomes knowledge. They're just aspects of the same thing, same movement of knowledge. So it is the source of all knowledge and ignorance, and the source of all delight and suffering. And again, if you see it looks like a paradox from that side, but from this side, what is delight? It is the free play. What is suffering? It is the play which is struggling, unable to freely express. And why? Because it accepts to pass through a passage of struggle. Sri Aurobindo uses this phrase in his Thoughts and Aphorisms, where he says that everything finally, I'm paraphrasing, everything finally is the working of God's will. And he says, when things happen against God's will, then he says, it is only God circling around his goal. When he moves towards the goal, that's when you have the overt expression, victory. When he is going around the goal, you say, but he is lost or he is losing. But no, not really. He is still building a more complete victory. So the difference from that side is only one of nuance. From the human side, these are opposite things. But they're not really opposite when you look at it this way. But here the whole focus is the first level of the experience of the merging of these two is where he is seen as the source of everything. We realize the divine, the eternal self of all, first as the source of all action and inaction, of all knowledge and ignorance, of all delight and suffering, and then of all good and evil, perfection and imperfection, of force and form, of the outgoing of nature from the eternal divine principle, and of all the return of nature towards the divine. Now again and again he is playing with this duality of what appears to us as opposites. But now from this perspective you will see they're just shades of the same thing. So we look at the next in the sequence, after delight and suffering, of all good and evil. And I think it is in relation to evil that Sri Aurobindo uses this phrase of God circling towards his goal. It seems as if something has been perverted, but the perversion is an appearance. And out of that perversion, eventually what emerges inevitably is a greater good. Now if you look at how it works in us, when we have gone through a struggle, let's take the example, and I will take a very mundane and down-to-earth example. I used to meet a friend in his house. We would often have a visitor, who was a former alcoholic. You met the man and you found great depth in him. A very fine gentleman. He did nothing much, he just sat. Sometimes he chatted, he listened, but he was always content. If you asked him what he did, he would just go and meet people, go to their houses, spend time with them, and especially alcoholics. And through his engagements with them, help them get free of their alcoholism. This man, when he was alcoholic, he was in business, I don't know, he must have been successful, making a lot of money, going through many stresses. Alcoholism was his way of escaping his stresses. Everything in his life collapsed. After having gone into that extreme of what would appear to us evil, he managed to break out of it, overcome it, I will even use the word master it, to a degree that he was not only free, he could imprint that poise of freedom onto people with whom he interacted. Much later in life, he had cancer. He died of the cancer. But in the days before even he died, he would say things like, very calmly, he would say, this too shall pass. I will get free of it. And you could see that while on the physical level the body was suffering, he was not suffering. Now, could this extraordinary achievement be, if not for that passage that he went through? If he had not gone through that extreme passage, if he had just come through perhaps some kind of an awakening spontaneously, without much struggle, he would have had something. But what he would have had might not have been pushed to that extreme. In the passage through that extreme of the form of the evil, he had to draw out in the extreme his innate power of the soul, to overcome that extreme of the evil. And then what came through was that much more complete, more perfect, more powerful in his life. So if you stop short with the appearance, one would see evil. If you look at the nature of the action through the passage of what appears evil, something far greater emerges, more perfect, more complete, more powerful. And that's God circling around his goal. So that is the source of all good and evil also, of perfection and imperfection. And we can apply the same idea. What is imperfection after all? But perfection in development. The human being is imperfect. Well, because evolution is not complete. We are in process towards perfection. Everything you see which is imperfect is only moving towards perfection. All force and form. Now in the very physical domain, form and force are different. You have a form and then you have a force which applies itself to form, pushes it. Force gets transmitted through form, but force and form are fundamentally different. Force does not become form, form does not become force. But when you go deep into the underlying reality of matter, you discover all form resolves itself into energy in movement, that is force. Repeating force, repeating itself in the same movement is what appears as stable form. Force released from repetition is what appears as force. All is ultimately force. Force moving freely or force bound in repetition which appears like form. But there is only one movement of consciousness, of the divine will. Force. So it is the source of it all. Now when you go through this step by step, you literally imprint these perceptions into your life. Each one of these is a kind of meditation. Bring this into your awareness. This also sourced from there, that also sourced from there. And in sequence of all the outgoing of nature from the eternal divine principle, that is the source. And of all the return of nature towards the divine, that is still the source. And so now you see something extraordinary in this last step. This is where the full bridging is seen, it being the movement of nature and this soul of the cosmos. Everything pours out, flows to become nature, moves in nature, and everything returns from nature back into this conscious soul of the cosmos. Everything moves out, whirls, returns. So we have the sense distinctly that nature itself is outgoing from the divine principle. She is nothing but this outgoing of the principle. And at the same time, we see all of herself is moving towards the divine at the same time. It's a very interesting idea. Nature couldn't exist if the divine was not pouring himself to become all this nature. And at the same time, nature cannot but pour back into the divine. Everything in nature is a movement eventually towards the divine. And it is this which in the Bhagavad Gita is described by Sri Krishna as the sacrifice, the yajna. Everything that's happening in the world, even your most unconscious movement, even your breathing, your heartbeat, your casual kick of the leg which may topple something and break, everything is a movement which is eventually moving to the divine. And so in this grand image, Brahman, the Gita says, is the offering. The priest is Brahman. The act of offering is Brahman. And into Brahman, all the offering moves. So everything emerges from that, pours out, is that, and returns back into that. Now, you see in practice what this means. Observe the movements of nature. Observe a single molecule. It's absorbed by the roots of the tree. Modified, restructured. Okay, take it as an atom. A single atom, modified, taken up in different molecules, rearranged into other molecules, taken up through the sap, brought onto the leaf, or through the stem into the flower, becomes this substance which is on the surface of the flower petal, and even its associates become the perfume which spread out. And then the flower drops, and the molecule comes back to the earth, undergoes further modifications until it is reabsorbed in the root and again taken up and keeps going. If you look at it this way, what is pushing, what is leading it? The divine will. Nudging, pushing that molecule as every other molecule. Towards what? Towards bringing forward more and more of it. Going back to eventually reabsorbed, to be thrown out, and reabsorbed, to be thrown out, until eventually the whole thing becomes more perfect, more beautiful, more complete, more conscious, more divine. And so the whole journey of nature is to grow into the image of her Lord, even as she is herself the pouring out of the Lord to go out to manifest himself. So this last one, as if absorbs all these different facets of the experience into one single gigantic movement. The closest you have to the merging of the... Reread the whole sentence and you see now how he builds into this most complete experience. All this action is only his power and knowledge and self-delight going abroad, being, to do the works of his eternal wisdom and will. Okay, now this is the base, and now when we observe the fine nuances, we realize the divine, the eternal self of all, first, as the source of all action and inaction, of all knowledge and ignorance, of all delight and suffering, of all good and evil, perfection and imperfection, of all force and form, of all the outgoing of nature from the eternal divine principle, and of all the return of nature towards the divine. So this is the first step in the joining of these two aspects. And now comes the second step. We realize it next as itself going abroad in its power and knowledge. For the power and knowledge are itself. Not only the source of their works, but the creator and doer of their works. One in all existences. So the next step is you realize what is going out, his own knowledge, his own power. But what is his knowledge and power? It is after all himself. So it is he that is moving out. It is he that is doing all the work in everything. And so you see how very seamlessly we are being led into the merging of these two, into one gigantic cosmic divine being. It is he that's moving out in that atom, pushing the atom and forming and reforming all the molecules so that the atom becomes the root, the sap, the flower, and then the manure and everything. It's he who's doing it. From outside the atom, and the atom itself is himself as atom, formed by his own movement. Everything is the divine working upon himself, with himself, to create and express in so many different forms. Now you see, at this point, we are seeing the divine in an active poise. Not only the source of the activity, but himself in the activity and as the activity. The creator and doer of their works. But still the sense of oneness is there, one in all existences. Now here's the interesting thing. When the bee comes to the flower, it is the divine working in the bee and as bee, coming to meet the same divine in the flower and as the pollen, and entering in some relation and moving away. When the gardener comes and plucks the flower, it is again the same divine, and he takes and offers the flower to his idol of the divine, which is stone, wood, whatever, and he is in the idol, not the idol itself, in the idol as the divine, equally in the person offering, in the offering itself, and in the one to whom it is offered. And you see now the entire universe as this one gigantic movement of the divine yajna. Sacrifice is the closest English word, but I dislike the word sacrifice because of the association of suffering or giving up, something. I sacrificed my favorite food. There's always this sense of denial. In the concept of the term yajna, there is only the sense of the fulfillment, of giving and of merging in fulfillment. Sacrament would just be something sacred. It's not quite that. Again, the word surrender has this strange nuance in the English language, that you surrender in the sense if you give up your will. And so the word surrender has also a negative connotation. But otherwise it would have been this sense of consecration, of giving, merging, pouring. I think the word consecration will be perhaps closer to... So, consecrated sacrifice would be a term. So this is the next stage where he is the doer. For the many souls of the universal manifestation are only faces of the one divine. The many minds, lives, bodies are only his masks and disguises. But he is never revealed in any of them. This is the point. They are masks, they are disguises, they are faces. The soul inside the flower is the face of the divine. The form of the flower is the mask and disguise. And so it is with every human being. The soul within is the face of the divine, many faces, infinitely. The mind, life, body are masks and disguises on the face. When the soul comes forward, revealing itself directly, it's as if the mask is shed. Now the difference between an ignorant life and a divinely perfected life is only this. In the ignorant life, the masks are stronger, the face is totally hidden. In the divinized life, the masks are shed and the face reveals itself directly through the mind, through the life, even through the body. That would be the transformed, divinized life. But everything is still essentially the play of the faces of the divine with masks. And so he builds on this, completing this experience. We perceive each being to be the universal Narayana presenting to us many faces. We lose ourselves in that and perceive our own mind, life and body as only one presentation of the self. And all whom we formerly conceived of as others are now of our consciousness, our self, in other minds, lives and bodies. And it's only a question of degrees in which everything is expressing. And there is one more step in which this thing is completed, where the fusion is complete of the play of the divine, and the whole thing is one divine being playing in and with himself, always free and yet fully involved in the play. And this portion we will complete the next this portion of the paragraph we will complete next time, and the next paragraph after we'll look at what will be the relationship of our individual existence to this consciousness of the cosmic consciousness. Because if we are living in that, what is the role of this one face and mask in the relationship with other faces and masks? There must be something, otherwise the whole point would be lost. Why at all start with this if you're going to merge into something which is only in that completeness? So that he takes up in the next paragraph. All of this we will continue on the Friday after next, which will be 29th. We will have the class on Sunday as usual, but I will be out next 1 week. So you see in this text now, he has taken the opportunity to lead us into the experience while describing it in all the fine steps and nuances, integrating all the facets possible in the experience which make it integral and complete. And then at each step you can see how it is seamless from the previous, until finally you have the complete experience of consciousness. When you find yourself, you come to full one divine cosmic consciousness. And the foundation for all this was the starting point which he said, immanent, silent self in all, as the foundation most easily laid for the mental being. And you understand now why so much stress was given earlier to get to this poise of the silent perception of the silent immanent self. And all the rest now from there, if we follow this process, is inevitable. We could of course choose to not follow and stay only in the silence and say this is all, but that would be a choice. We can take a moment for any comments or questions. You see, Sri Aurobindo himself lived in this. All his actions came from that poise. As did the mother. It's after that, as he will say later, there are only degrees to which the divinity is revealed and the disguise is reduced. And if you look at the human journey of evolution in this way, successively each of these masks, as it is transformed, the face reveals through the mind, through the life energies, and eventually through the body, is what we call the transformation of the mind, life and body. And the transformation itself would be in degrees, until eventually it would be a transformation by the direct expression of the soul and self, down to the most material form, where the body itself will be a substance expressing the soul in the density of physical matter. What would that matter be like? It would be of a matter altogether of a different order. Conscious divine substance, constantly representing its divinity in density and form of physical matter. It would be plastic necessarily. And Mother has described some of the characteristics of that. Such is the nature of our evolutionary journey. And that's why again and again he reminds us that what we have achieved so far is only the starting point of the real adventure. We have built the basis in which this real work can take place. For those who are coming here regularly, we will have a video of one of some other talks to continue the mood of the study. And for those who are watching online, we will upload a video so that we will still have something on the Friday. I wanted to complete with this. There is a sonnet of Sri Aurobindo which is called Cosmic Consciousness. So this would be the right time to read from that. There are many related sonnets. There is this Cosmic Consciousness which I will read, but there is also Cosmic Dance, and then there is Cosmic Spirit, which represent different aspects. One of the spirit, one of the movement, but this is Cosmic Consciousness. I have wrapped the wide world in my wider self, and time and space my spirit's seeing are. I am the god and demon, ghost and elf. I am the wind's speed and the blazing star. All nature is the nursling of my care. I am the struggle and the eternal rest. The world's joy thrilling runs through me. I bear the sorrow of millions in my lonely breast. I have learned a close identity with all, yet am by nothing bound that I become. Carrying in me the universe's call, I mount to my imperishable home. I pass beyond time and life on measureless wings, yet still am one with born and unborn things. Oh.